Preparing for a business analyst at MUFG interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 20 key questions you're likely to face. For each question you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. How would you gather and validate requirements for a new banking product at MUFG? I would begin by clarifying the product's business objective, target customers, success measures, and regulatory context. I would interview relationship managers, operations, compliance, risk, technology, and customers, then map the current and future processes. I would document functional and non-functional requirements, assumptions, exceptions, and controls in a traceability matrix. Prototypes and playback sessions would expose gaps early. Finally, I would obtain agreement through documented acceptance criteria and controlled sign-off, while keeping requirements versioned. While answering, focus on stakeholder identification, interviews, workshops, process observation, regulatory requirements, traceability, prioritization, prototypes, and formal validation with business, technology, risk, compliance, and operations teams. Question 2. Tell me about a time you handled conflicting requirements from senior banking stakeholders. In one project, sales wanted faster onboarding while compliance required additional verification steps. I first documented both objectives rather than treating them as opposing opinions. I quantified customer impact, operational effort, financial risk, and regulatory exposure, then facilitated a decision workshop. We agreed to risk-based verification, automated low-risk checks, and manual review for exceptions. I recorded the decision, rationale, and ownership in the requirements log. This preserved compliance while materially improving turnaround time. Make sure to cover active listening, separating needs from solutions, objective decision criteria, regulatory constraints, impact analysis, escalation, negotiation, documentation, and maintaining stakeholder trust throughout the resolution. Question 3. How would you map an as-is and to-be process for a cross-border payment workflow? I would define the process boundary from payment initiation through settlement, reconciliation, and exception closure. The as-is map would show actors, systems, handoffs, decisions, data fields, control points, and waiting time using BPMN or swim lanes. I would validate it through observation and walkthroughs, not assumptions. For the to-be state, I would remove duplicate entry, automate straight-through processing, preserve sanction screening, and design clear exception ownership. I would compare cycle time, risk, cost, and customer outcomes. In your answer, talk about scope, SIPOC, BPMN or swim lanes, handoffs, systems, data, controls, exception paths, pain points, compliance checks, target state benefits, and stakeholder validation. Question 4. What is the difference between a business requirement, functional requirement, and non-functional requirement? A business requirement states the outcome, such as reducing corporate payment processing time by 30%. A functional requirement describes what the solution must do, such as route a payment for sanctions screening before release. A non-functional requirement defines how well it must operate, including availability, security, auditability, and response time. I keep each requirement measurable, testable, and linked to the business objective. This distinction helps architects design correctly and testers build complete coverage. Be sure to mention business outcomes, system behavior, quality attributes, measurable wording, examples from banking, traceability, and why confusing these requirement types creates delivery and testing problems. Question 5. How do you prioritize requirements when budget, time, and regulatory obligations compete? I would first separate mandatory regulatory, legal, security, and control requirements from discretionary enhancements. For the remaining items, I would score customer value, risk reduction, revenue impact, effort, dependencies, and urgency. Moscow can structure the conversation, but I would avoid using it mechanically. If time is constrained, I would define a compliant minimum release and defer lower value features. I would make trade-offs visible, obtain sponsor approval, and revisit priorities as evidence or regulations change. While answering, focus on regulatory criticality, customer value, risk reduction, dependencies, cost, urgency, Moscow or weighted scoring, minimum viable scope, and transparent stakeholder agreement. Question 6. How would you define acceptance criteria for a customer onboarding feature? I would write criteria in business readable given when then form. 4. Make sure to cover given when then structure, happy paths, negative scenarios, KYC and AML controls, data validation, role permissions, audit evidence, measurable outcomes, and business sign-off. Question 7. Describe how you would analyze the root cause of recurring payment processing failures. I would define failure precisely by payment type, geography, time period, system, and business impact. Then I would analyze logs, rejection codes, operational tickets, process maps, and samples, using Pareto analysis to identify concentration. 5 whys or a fishbone diagram would help distinguish data quality, integration, configuration, process, and training causes. I would validate the suspected cause with targeted evidence, implement corrective and preventive actions, and monitor failure rates after release rather than declaring success immediately. In your answer, talk about defining the problem, separating symptoms from causes, data collection, Pareto analysis, 5 whys, fishbone analysis, system logs, process controls, and corrective actions. Question 8. How would you ensure data quality when integrating customer information across legacy banking systems? I would establish a data dictionary and assign owners for critical fields such as customer identifier, legal name, risk rating, and account status. Profiling would reveal nulls, duplicates, inconsistent formats, and conflicting sources. I would document source-to-target mappings, transformation rules, validation thresholds, reconciliation totals, and exception workflows. The integration should preserve lineage, access controls, and audit evidence. I would measure quality continuously through dashboards, because one-time cleansing cannot solve recurring upstream defects. Be sure to mention data ownership, canonical definitions, profiling, mapping, completeness, accuracy, consistency, uniqueness, reconciliation, lineage, privacy, controls, and exception management. Question 9. What would you include in a business requirements document for a major banking transformation? My document would start with the problem statement, business objectives, measurable outcomes, scope boundaries, and stakeholder roles. It would describe current and target processes, functional and non-functional requirements, data needs, interfaces, controls, assumptions, constraints, dependencies, risks, and open questions. I would include a glossary, process diagrams, use cases, acceptance criteria, and traceability to objectives. The document is not merely a specification, it is a shared baseline for design, delivery, testing, governance, and change control. While answering, focus on objectives, scope, stakeholders, current state, future state, requirements, assumptions, constraints, risks, dependencies, data, controls, success metrics, and approval governance. Question 10. How would you work with developers and testers in an Agile delivery team at MUFG? I would collaborate continuously rather than hand requirements over once. During refinement, I would explain the business outcome, clarify rules, split stories vertically, identify dependencies, and confirm acceptance criteria with developers and testers. 3 Amigos discussions help expose ambiguity before coding. During execution, I would answer questions quickly, review demos against intended outcomes, and help triage defects by business severity. I would also use retrospectives to improve requirement quality, discovery timing, and stakeholder feedback loops. Make sure to cover refinement, invest stories, acceptance criteria, 3 amigos sessions, dependencies, testability, defect clarification, demos, retrospectives, and collaboration without becoming a delivery bottleneck. Question 11. How would you assess the impact of a new financial regulation on existing systems and processes? I would translate the regulation into explicit obligations, affected customer types, products, jurisdictions, data elements, deadlines, and control requirements. Next, I would inventory relevant processes, systems, reports, interfaces, policies, and owners, then perform a documented gap assessment. I would classify gaps by regulatory risk and delivery effort, define remediation requirements, and build a traceability matrix from rule to control and test evidence. Compliance would validate interpretation, while governance would approve scope, milestones, and residual risk. In your answer, talk about interpreting the rule, affected products and jurisdictions, gap analysis, controls, data and reporting changes, ownership, timelines, testing, evidence, and regulatory sign-off. Question 12. How do you manage requirements traceability from business need through testing and implementation? I assign each requirement a unique identifier and link it to the originating objective, process, user story, acceptance criteria, test cases, defects, and release. A traceability matrix exposes untested requirements and tests without business justification. For regulated changes, it also links controls, evidence, approvals, and policy references. I update links as scope changes and review them at refinement, test readiness, and release gates. This supports auditability while giving stakeholders confidence that agreed needs were actually delivered. Be sure to mention unique identifiers, traceability matrices, linked epics and stories, acceptance criteria, test cases, defects, release scope, change control, and audit readiness. Question 13. What metrics would you use to measure the success of a business analysis-led banking initiative? I would begin with the initiative's intended outcome rather than defaulting to delivery metrics. For onboarding, measures might include completion time, abandonment, manual touch rate, KYC exception rate, cost per case, and customer satisfaction. For payments, I could track straight-through processing, rejects, settlement delays, and operational incidents. I would establish baselines, targets, owners, data sources, and measurement periods before launch. Balanced metrics matter. Faster processing is not success if control failures or customer harm increase. While answering, focus on outcome-based metrics such as cycle time, straight-through processing, error rate, cost, adoption, customer satisfaction, control effectiveness, incidents, and benefits realization. Question 14. How would you handle a request to change requirements after development has started? I would first clarify the change's business reason, urgency, and whether it is regulatory, risk-related, or discretionary. Then I would assess effects on scope, design, data, interfaces, testing, schedule, cost, controls, and downstream teams. I would present options, include now, defer to a later release, or replace lower value scope. The authorized product or governance owner should decide using documented evidence. After approval, I would update requirements, backlog, traceability, plans, and stakeholder communications. In your answer, talk about impact assessment, urgency, regulatory drivers, scope, cost, schedule, architecture, testing, traceability, approval authority, and communication of accepted trade-offs. Question 15. How would you explain a complex technical solution to executives and non-technical banking stakeholders? I would tailor the message to the decision required, not present technical detail for its own sake. I might explain an API integration as a controlled connection that transfers approved information between systems, then show its customer benefit, cost, risk, timeline, and dependencies. A simple current versus target diagram and a small set of options usually work well. I would state my recommendation, decision ask, and consequences clearly. Then invite questions and confirm understanding through playback. Make sure to cover audience analysis, business outcomes, plain language, visual storytelling, risks, options, financial impact, decision asks, appropriate detail, and checking understanding. Question 16. How would you analyze whether a manual banking process should be automated? I would document the process, volume, handling time, error rate, rework, control points, exceptions, and customer impact. Automation is attractive when work is repetitive, rules are stable, data is structured, and benefits exceed delivery and maintenance costs. I would test feasibility with operations, technology, risk, and compliance, especially where judgment or segregation of duties is required. The business case would compare investment, savings, risk reduction, and service improvement, while retaining human review for complex exceptions. Be sure to mention volume, repetition, rules stability, error rates, cost, customer impact, control requirements, exception handling, feasibility, security, ROI, and implementation risk. Question 17. Tell me about a time you used data or SQL to support a business analysis recommendation. I once investigated why account opening cases exceeded their service target. I defined the metric carefully, queried case, channel, timestamp, and exception data, and validated results against operational reports. After removing duplicates and separating waiting time from handling time, I found that a specific document verification queue created most delays. I recommended automated completeness checks and a queue-based work allocation change. A pilot reduced average turnaround time, and I monitored exception rates to ensure speed did not compromise control quality. In your answer, talk about defining the question, validating sources, joining relevant data, handling duplicates and nulls, checking assumptions, interpreting trends, and turning analysis into an actionable recommendation. Question 18. How would you identify and manage operational risks in a new banking process? I would conduct a structured risk workshop with process owners, operations, technology, compliance, and internal control specialists. We would identify failure scenarios across people, process, data, systems, vendors, and external events, then rate likelihood and impact. For material risks, I would define preventive and detective controls, segregation of duties, escalation paths, continuity arrangements, and accountable owners. Before launch, controls require evidence and testing. Afterward, monitoring, incidents, and near misses should drive periodic reassessment. While answering, focus on risk workshops, failure scenarios, likelihood and impact, preventive and detective controls, ownership, residual risk, segregation of duties, business continuity, and monitoring. Question 19. How would you approach a business case for upgrading a legacy core banking interface? I would establish the baseline, incidents, maintenance cost, manual work, latency, capacity limits, security exposure, and missed business opportunities. I would compare options such as retaining, enhancing, wrapping, replacing, or migrating the interface. Each option would include investment, operating cost, delivery risk, resilience, regulatory impact, dependencies, and benefits. I would model conservative and optimistic scenarios, identify assumptions, and recommend a phased path with measurable milestones. The strongest case connects technology renewal to customer, control, and operational outcomes. Make sure to cover problem definition, baseline costs, strategic alignment, options, migration risk, resilience, security, regulatory needs, benefits, assumptions, sensitivity analysis, and phased delivery. Question 20. Why do you want to work as a business analyst at MUFG, and how would you add value? MUFG appeals to me because its scale and international banking environment create meaningful problems where disciplined analysis matters. I would add value by translating business objectives into clear, testable requirements while balancing customer experience, operational efficiency, technology constraints, and regulatory obligations. I bring structured facilitation, process thinking, data analysis, and careful stakeholder communication. I am also comfortable challenging assumptions respectfully and documenting decisions. My goal is to help teams deliver improvements that are useful, controlled, measurable, and sustainable. In your answer, connect MUFG's global banking environment with structured analysis, stakeholder collaboration, risk awareness, customer outcomes, data-driven decisions, continuous improvement, and respect for controls and diverse teams. If you are still with us, congratulations! You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.